Welcome to the Nations vs. Nonprofits Weekly Briefing. This is your weekly briefing number 12, How Schools Misteach Bay Area Native History. Most people first encounter Bay Area Native history in school. What they are taught often feels neutral and well-intentioned, but much of it is structurally inaccurate. These mistakes are not just about missing details. They shape how institutions, educators, and the public misunderstand who Indigenous peoples are today. School curricula tend to collapse Indigenous history into the distant past. Native people are presented as pre-contact cultures rather than as living political communities. This framing erases continuity. It makes it easier to treat modern Indigenous governments as symbolic or optional. Another common problem is the substitution of culture for governance. Students are taught language names, village names, or generalized cultural practices without being taught how tribal governments function. This creates the false impression that identity alone is equivalent to political authority. Maps play a major role in this confusion. Many classroom maps present simplified or speculative boundaries without explaining their sources or limits. Linguistic or archaeological maps are often treated as political maps. Students are not taught that these categories describe different things. Educational materials also rely heavily on secondary summaries. Academic hypotheses are presented as settled fact. Late 20th century classifications are repeated without context, dates, or caveats. Over time, repetition hardens interpretation into perceived truth. Finally, schools rarely teach how recognition, consultation, and governance actually work today. Students are not taught how tribal governments are identified in administrative records, or why institutions rely on documentation rather than narrative. This leaves future educators, planners, and journalists without the tools to evaluate claims responsibly. These teaching gaps have consequences. When history is flattened, living governments are obscured. When categories are confused, authority is misplaced. Accurate education requires distinguishing culture from governance, language from politics, and interpretation from record. Correcting these issues is not about adding more content. It is about teaching how evidence works. When students learn that difference, Bay Area Native history becomes clearer, not more complicated. Thanks for watching this week's briefing. Nations vs. Nonprofits weekly briefings drop every Monday. Tune in for next week's subject, Why Self-Authorization Fails.